Let's keep going. Engine performance 1 test 13. All the following statements are correct except what? That would be C. A defective check valve is not the only reason fuel pressure might drop after the pump is shut off. Now what that's talking about is when you checking your fuel pressure, you're supposed to put your gauge on it, make sure your gauge is not leaking, pressure up the fuel system, or crank it up, let it run a little bit, switch it off, and see if the fuel pressure drops off. If the fuel pressure drops off, fairly quickly after you shut off the engine and the fuel pressure should be staying there, it's going somewhere. Usually it's going back through the pump into the tank, but it can be going past the fuel pressure regulator if it's got one of those on the fuel rail. The fuel pressure regulator can have a ruptured diaphragm. You can have injectors that are leaking. You can have a fuel leak somewhere that you'll usually smell. But the defective check valve is not the only reason fuel pressure might drop. So number one is going to be C. All of the following statements are correct except, and I'm just going to jump down here and say inline fuel filters may be installed in either direction. Don't do that. Inline fuel filters may not be installed in either direction. Why is that? Whenever something's going through an oil filter or a fuel filter, which side of the filter is actually catching the trash that's being filtered out?
Back side. Where it enters. It goes through the filter.
I mean, if you're looking at the element, is it going to be the outside of the element or the inside of the element that's doing the filtering?
Inside?
Outside. You got more space. You got more area on the outside, and also the pleats are open, so it can store more of that junk.
That makes sense.
Oil filter, fuel filter, any of those filters that are round are basically going to be the outside of the filter is going to be the dirty side. The inside's basically going to be the side where the clean stuff's coming through. Just remember that. Technician A says fuel filters are located in the supply line. Technician B says fuel filters are located in the fuel return line. Now, I don't like that question because in that truck that Brian and Harley are putting that engine in out there, the fuel filter is in the dadgum tank. It's not on the rail. Of course, I guess you could say that's on the supply side, but it's basically on the suction end of the fuel filter.
That just that little screen sock thing?
No, they've got a better filter in there. They got a tighter filter that stops more stuff than that. But one way or another, you cannot change that fuel filter without pulling the pump out. Typically you replace the whole thing anyway. If you got a bunch of crap in there that stops up that filter, then you got other problems anyway. And I will tell you something else. If somebody is pumping gas out of a rusty farm tank into their vehicle, those little iron particles are fine enough to where they can get past a fuel filter and go in there and clog up the dadgum injectors. They'll go right on through a fuel filter. So I mean, you got to be careful about pumping gas out of one of them tanks that is steel. It's a plain old steel tank. It hadn't been treated on the inside.
So it'll be neither?
Huh?
It'll be neither?
On number
3.
on number 3, yeah, 3's gonna be A. What happens when fuel lines get too hot and only fuel vapors go to the injectors?
We'll say vapor lock.
That's a good answer, Brian. Good answer. Technician A says, well, incidentally, usually on these fuel injection systems, we don't have a lot of trouble with vapor lock. Used to on the older systems, we did. Fuel pump could get weak if the fuel line was running too close to the manifold or something like that. You'd have issues. Technician A says low power on acceleration is a symptom of a restricted fuel filter. Technician B says loss of high-speed engine performance is a symptom of restricted fuel filter. Both those guys are right. A lot of times whenever I'd have somebody come over here and say my car won't start and I replaced the fuel filter and it still wouldn't start, well, that didn't do anything anyway to get it to start. I mean, if it was stopped up like a brick, there's some stuff in there, but typically it's going to start losing power before the fuel filter ever stops up bad enough where it won't start, go at all. I'll tell you something else, that can slip up on you. I've actually taken, I took the fuel filter off my car, and it's that 07 Taurus I drive. And a few days earlier, this Explorer was in here that this lady drives from Ashford every day, Olivia's vehicle. And I says, let's check the fuel filter on this. And man, it was just about plug slam up. We blew backwards through it and all kind of grub come out of it, And she wasn't having any problems, but it was almost completely clogged. And that's really not good for the fuel pump to have to push against that, So I said, I can't believe she let this thing go like this. And about 2 days later, I pulled the fuel filter off my car and it was just as bad. But it'll sleep up and slip on it. And on a pickup truck that uses more gas, it needs to be changed more often. You know, they used to say 30,000 miles, and I think pickups went down to 15 on the ones that have an inline filter on the trucks that I was working on. Anyway, how much fuel should be supplied to the engine every 30 seconds? That's a good question, isn't it?
1 pint.
Actually, it'll be 2 pints. 2 pints every 30 seconds. They used to have us to run spin the engine over for 30 seconds and see how much fuel came out of the fuel pump into a container. You know?
I remember doing something like that
Yep.
at one point.
Of course, the thing about it is, if it catches fire, then you'll have your hair all singed and everything like I did one time. I don't want to talk about that. On a General Motors vehicle, how long will the fuel pump run if the ignition is turned on but the engine is not started? How long will it turn on? Like if I turn on the key, but I don't start it, how long is the pump going to run on a GM vehicle?
2 seconds?
No, 2 seconds is the right answer on that. Now, if you've got some of these second generation Power Stroke diesels, it's an electric fuel pump that runs 20 seconds when you turn on the key. That's only on a diesel, some of the diesel though. The fuel pump is turned on and off by what?
Fuel pump relay?
Fuel pump relay. Yes, he was a thinker. When the vacuum line is removed from the pressure regulator with the engine running, what will the effect be on the fuel pressure?
Fuel pressure would
Increase. I used to see those motorhomes come in there. Those motorhomes would come in there and they'd say, we're losing power, and there'd be a old long, huge motorhome with an 80-gallon gas tank on it, And they say, we're losing power, this thing won't go, it gets hot and it gets where it won't hardly run. And the first thing I'd do is I'd go in there and pop the engine cover off, put the fuel pressure gauge on there, pull the vacuum line off the fuel pressure regulator, and snap the throttle. And if you do that and you see the fuel pressure drop when you snap the throttle, it's over. You're gonna put a filter on it first if you want to, maybe let them try to get by cheap, but that ain't usually what it is. Typically, it's going to be the pump, particularly if it runs worse when it's hot. Now, with 80 gallons of gas in the tank and you got to drop the tank, that's no fun, because we didn't have anything that would hold 80 gallons of gasoline. So I had to figure out some ways to get that gas tank down, safely, so I could replace those pumps. And I used to do a bunch of them in the summer. The motorhomes came in there, and they paid us $3 an hour extra when we were having to work on a motorhome, because the mechanics despised them. All right, let me see here. Let me see, where are we at here? Which one are we on?
10.
Technician A says all the injectors in a sequential fuel injection system often use the same power wire. Is he telling the truth?
Close?
He is.
Oh, okay.
The power wire. Technician B says each injector in a sequential fuel injection system should have a different ground wire. If it's sequential, that means it's firing them one at a time, right? Technician A says fuel pressure regulators are often located that means 10 was C, by the way. Technician A says fuel pressure regulators are often located on the return side of the fuel rail. Technician B says the fuel pressure regulator is located at the fuel tank on vehicles using mechanical returnless systems. Who's right about that? C. Now, I was telling somebody yesterday, and I can't even remember who it was. It might have been you, Daniel, that I used to let, whenever one came in, I suspected the fuel pump was bad because it was cutting off when it was hot. 2 things. If you mash that Schrader valve and a whole bunch of gas comes spraying out of there like a fire hose, you found your problem because you got a bunch of air in there that's squeezed up. If it's like it ought to be when you mash the Schrader valve, it ought to wet your fingers, but it shouldn't hose out of there like psh. If it does that, you got issues. Secondly, I would sometimes put a fuel pressure gauge on one and let it run for 5 or 6 hours. And whenever I would walk by, next thing you know, the pressure would be gone. I'd crank it up, and pressure would come up and go right back down. You know you got a bad fuel pump. But it'll only happen after it's been running for a long time.
Like, some of those fuel pumps, like, press that thing down there and shoot up and hit the hood.
It's not supposed to do that. If it does, there's a problem. There's air in there. If
Do
you
it
got
while it was running?
yeah.
Huh.
It don't matter if you did it while it was running. You still ought not to have it spray up and hit the hood like somebody shot it out of a fire hose or something.
You might want to check something on that Ranger then.
Yeah, that's not correct.
My low Ranger does the same thing.
Yeah, well, what you got there is you're cavitating, and now sometimes you can have a cavitating fuel pump that's pushing air in there, and it won't be as much of a problem as it is on other vehicles. I saw one that was cavitating like that on a Lincoln Town Car that had one of them sideways 4.6s in it, and it had a walking skip that was going through the firing order 1, 3, 7, 2, 6, 5, 4, 8. It was a strange walk and skip, and the hotline was totally blown away by that. And it turned out that it was cavitating, getting air in there, and had air bubbles in there, and it just so happened that the air would walk from, through the firing order some kind of way. I don't know what was going on in that fuel rail. I wish it was made out of, glass so I could see in there. But when I put a fuel pump in it, I noticed when I bled the air out of the fuel rail, it stopped idling rough, but it had no power problems. See what I'm saying? Sometimes if it's cavitating enough, like if the pump's starting to wear out, instead of being a positive displacement pump, it'll pull some air in there too. But anyway,
That's what I did to the Ranger. As soon as I let it squirt, after I changed out the relay, and I let it squirt out, and then I cranked it back up again. That's why I was running.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. Well, basically, if it's pushing a lot of air, you got to get that out of there. But anyway, let me go on down here so I don't run out of time.
12.
Yeah, 12. Technician A says vacuum-operated fuel pressure regulators allow an equal pressure drop across the fuel injectors all the time. That's A, basically. The fuel pressure regulator is supposed to maintain the pressure differential between the fuel and the pressure that's in a manifold. So when you're giving it, if you got all of your vacuums going because you're wide open throttle, the pressure is going to rise 10 pounds. You see what I mean? So they want to make sure that they found out after a while that wasn't a big deal though. Technician A says vehicles with electronic returnless systems use pulse width modulation to power the pump and maintain fuel pressure. And that's true. Technician B says electronic returnless fuel system uses a power transistor to control the fuel pump. That's true too. Number 14, all these are returnless fuel systems except demand delivery, electronic returnless, mechanical returnless. All of these are returnless fuel systems. So 14 is going to be a big fat D. Which term describes the PCM shutting off fuel injection when the accelerator is pressed all the way down?
Open loop mode?
No, that's clear flood.
Okay.
Not every vehicle has clear flood, so be aware of that. I'll tell you something else too. If you might be surprised, a lot of times you can push the gas pedal all the way to the floor on a perfectly operating vehicle and it won't start. It'll go, no. Now what's that telling you? What if I've got a throttle position sensor that fails at what's equivalent to wide open throttle? I may not have any injector pulse. Maybe in clear flood mode, even though nobody's got their foot on the gas. Here's another thing. If you're wanting to demonstrate clear flood mode to somebody, there may be gas puddled up in the manifold and it may start up anyway. So if you're going to demonstrate that, make sure you get ready to let off the gas real quick if the motor starts up. Don't tack it out of, like that thing. And actually, that's an interesting set of circumstances there. Let me see here.
Which term? 16?
16. Which term describes the PCM using oxygen sensor feedback to control fuel delivery? You just said something a second ago. What was it?
Open loop mode?
Closed loop is when it's
Okay.
paying attention to the oxygen sensors. You guys should know that. Technician A says an idle air control valve controls the airflow past closed throttle plates. You remember the worksheet I gave out on that? Technician B says idle air control is usually controlled by a stepper motor. Now, that's sort of true, but on other vehicles don't have some have stepper motors, some don't. And a stepper motor just basically moves a little at the time. On that one on that engine right there, that Ford one, it usually applies more current to pull a little plunger against a spring to do it. And it's like a variable force solenoid on a transmission or something. Let's see, which of these fuel injection systems delivers fuel into the intake manifold?
What was the answer to 17?
Yeah, I was trying to figure.
Oh, the answer to 17, that was C. Number 18 is basically going to be throttle body injection.
TBI.
Yeah, it's basically above the throttle plates. I don't really like the way the question's worded. When the fuel pressure regulator on a GDI system is deactivated, is the fuel pressure defaults to what? Low pressure mode. Gasoline direct injection is what GDI is. What gasoline direct injection operating mode is used to burn sulfur from the catalyst? That's going to be your stratified heating mode. The cool thing about GDI is you can not only determine when the fuel is injected, you can also determine how it's injected. And also the droplets that are coming out of those GDI injectors are a heck of a lot smaller than the droplets coming out of a regular injector. So you can actually get a lot cleaner burn that way. Some GDI systems can fire the injector more than once per injecting event, and that's true. GDI injector is not held open with 50 to 90 volts, that's false. They are a higher voltage injector though. The late injection event may be used to heat up the catalytic converter, that's true. In other words, it may put the fuel in there later so that it'll be really hot coming out of there to warm the catalytic converter up and cook it off. Which component of this GDI high pressure pump is the pressure regulator?
B?
All right, let's get us focused here. Which one of those is a pressure regulator? And he said it was B. What do you think? Now, the pressure regulator operates electrically.
Oh, then it's gonna be,
A.
Gonna be A, that's exactly right. This illustration shows what type of combustion chamber? What type of combustion chamber are we looking at there?
C?
That's gonna be a spray-guided combustion chamber, kinda complicated. All right, let's see how quick we can whip through this. We got a pretty good few questions on that, but we're gonna run through it. Electronic throttle control systems, fuel injection diagnosis, emission controls, and scan tools. And we pretty well ran the gamut on this particular book. Technician A says electronic throttle control uses a stepper motor. Technician B says it's spring loaded to about 16 to 20% throttle opening. Who's right about that? What do you think?
Technician B.
Technician B? Hold on. I'm hung up on something here. I got stuff there. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. B, that's right. After servicing the air filter on an electronic throttle control equipped vehicle, the technician has forgotten to connect the throttle motor wiring. What will happen when the vehicle is started?
Vehicle won't.
It'll start but won't accelerate, right? We got these vehicle, that Sonata out there has got electronic throttle control on it, and just about every GM car that's, newer than 2000 model does. When the ignition system is first turned on, a click noise is heard from under the hood of a vehicle equipped with ETC. Technician A says this is normal operation. Technician B says the TAC motor should not move unless the engine is running. That's A, actually. If you want to open the electronic throttle control and clean the throttle plate, have somebody mash the gas for you. Don't try to open it with your hand, because on some vehicles you'll destroy that throttle body. And better be safe than sorry. All electronic throttle control system includes the following components, except, and that would be an idle control switch. They'll have redundant sensors on the accelerator pedal though. Technician A says electronic throttle control uses a stepper motor. Technician B says electronic throttle control uses a vacuum control stepper motor to keep it at 16%. That's D. Neither one of those guys is right. And number 6 is going to be ignition off, key out of the ignition. What should happen if a technician uses a screwdriver to push on the throttle plate in an attempt to open the valve? The throttle should move and then spring back. Like I say, I don't like doing that. Whoever it is that's done this stuff is. All right, what test is being performed here? I've got, huh?
Paragraph 7, the throttle body may be cleaned if recommended by the vehicle's manufacturer. In what conditions are occurring?
D. All right, you got that right there. What are they doing in that? What are they doing in that illustration?
They're checking the voltage.
What? I don't see any wires except for the ones coming out of the meter. Do you? That's injector resistance, buddy. Usually about 16 ohms on the average when you're doing that.
Okay.
Number 9. Which test is being performed here?
Injector voltage drop.
What do you think, guys? Everybody like that?
Yeah.
Or S? Yeah, it's a C. It's a supply voltage drop, actually. Look where the meters are. See this? It's not the, yeah. Did you say voltage drop? You did, didn't you?
I said injector voltage.
Yeah, it's supply voltage drop, basically what they were looking at right there. So you're close. Probe the hot side of the injector and battery positive. Except the stupid thing is not drawn right. Look at the positive. Look, it's probably going to be the red one over there. I don't like that picture. Battery positive to the supply side. Hurry up. How much voltage is generally available to the injector?
5 volts.
Battery voltage of the injectors. The injectors are doing a job. And on a hot rod car, you'll have less resistance in the injectors because you want them to work faster. Which term describes the electrical current flow in the opposite direction when an injector coil is energized? Inductive reactance. Technician A says if the fuel pump pressure is correct, fuel pump volume will be correct as well. Technician B says fuel pump may produce specified pressure be below the specified volume. And that is true because I've seen that. Now, the first guy's a knothead. That's going to be B. Technician A says to pressure clean the fuel system between 75 and 90 psi before starting the engine. Technician B says to pressure clean the fuel system using the 2.1 mixture of solvent to gasoline. Who's correct about that? That's A.
Okay.
Clearest example of what deal is on that. Bobby Lundy rebuilt the engine, or not, it wasn't him. It was he built the engine on a different car. Sean rebuilt the engine on that Neon, and whenever he put it back on, it was running terrible and all that kind of stuff. And it turned out there was a bunch of rust flakes and stuff that were settled into the bottom of the fuel rail. And when he turned all that upside down, they got up and they got out of the injectors and clogged them about halfway up and all that. How would we find that, by the way? How do you find out if you got clogged injector?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have pulse test.
Yeah,
Listen
I
to
was
him.
gonna say
That
something
little,
like that.
the one that everybody hasn't done, where you're checking. Incidentally, you can do it on the Neon real easy, but you just hook that little machine up and all that. Make sure you don't short anything out, or you'll burn little circuit trails on it and all that stuff.
Yeah,
We're not going to talk about that. All right. So where are we at here? Let's see. Following statements are correct, except, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's B. Relearning the PCM should never be attempted. Please. When you take that battery cable off and you make repairs, there used to be some recalls where the Dodge people had them replacing throttle body injectors on some of their pickups because the ball that closes off the injector would have pits in it and it would cause it to run too rich. Well, they weren't telling anybody about adaptive learning back then, and so what happened was the mechanics, without even pulling the battery cable off, would just pop the injector in there and it would run like crap because it was used to having an injector that had a pitted ball on it. And some of the mechanics got really disgusted because they didn't know what to do. They didn't know why it was running bad, and they put the old injector back in there. But the funny thing about it was when they finally told us about adaptive learning and everybody got to where they understood it, you take the cable off when you're doing your repairs, put it back on, you don't have all those issues, right? All right, let's see.
15.
Which of the following would describe reasons for poor engine performance in cold weather? Contaminated fuel, low fuel pressure, insufficient fuel volume. All the above is correct. Technician A says the fuel system should be diagnosed first in a no-start condition. Technician B says ignition system trigger device is used to synchronize the fuel injection.
A.
That's going to be C, by the way. You know, your crank sensor is going to tell it how many times to fire the injectors per cycle. It won't tell it how long to keep them open. It just tells it how long, you know, as the engine picks up speed, the injectors click faster, right? During a fuel injector pressure drop test, let me see, can't talk to you now, buddy. Let me see, hold on a second here.
Fuel injector pressure drop test.
During a fuel injector pressure drop test, the difference between any two fuel injectors should not exceed what?
C.
It's going to be 1.5 psi if you want to be a real stickler on that. And incidentally, 16 was C. An injector pressure drop test is being discussed. Technician A said always uses a special service tool to pulse fuel injectors. That's what we were doing. Technician B says the injector for each cylinder should only be flow tested 4 times without starting the engine. And number 18, that is A, basically. That 4 times is too many, really. It's going to, if you get, you're supposed to start it and let it, you know, clear that gas out there. You put too much gas in there, you got issues. All of these are type of injectors except the number 19. I'm just going to tell you D. All of them are saturated switch, pulse width modulated, peak and hold. There you go. Let me see. When looking at a solenoid with an oscilloscope, what event often follows applying or removing power from the coil windings? Number 20. That's going to be you're going to have a voltage spike. Okay, explain engine off natural vacuum evaporative leak checking system. What happens when you turn it off and you walk away, closes up, as the gas cools down, shouldn't that pressure drop in the tank? If you seal off the tank and you switch off an engine and the gasoline contracts, shouldn't the pressure drop in the tank?
No.
Yeah, it will if you got
Okay.
if it's not vented. That's what that's what they do. I mean, you know, all it does is it closes it up, then it looks for it to, you know, it's awake while you're away from it. Catalytic converter stores then burns oxygen. Is that true or false? That's false. This drawing shows a catalytic converter with exhaust gases entering the cat. What are the gases changed to at the cat outlet? Who knows? H2O and CO2. O2 sensors in the OBD2 system are sending the voltage signal as shown. At number 24, it tells you got a bad catalytic converter. Which pins of the DLC should be connected in order to receive flash codes from a GM OBD1 PCM, as if that was a big deal. B, A and B, remember that, you'll be able to have that. Which tool could be used on Ford OBD1 system to retrieve DTCs if the star tester is not available? Well, number 26, that's going to be B. You can use an analog voltmeter. I've got a worksheet on that, by the way, that I give out in one of my engine repair classes. How many times must the engine ignition switch be cycled to put a Chrysler computer in self-test? 3. 1, 2, 3. Although they say 5, 3 is the right answer. On 27, put B. It ain't 2, it's 3. They're wrong about that. Technician A says generic scan tools must be able to read all generic OBD2 codes. Technician B says all generic scan tools must be able to read manufacturer OBD2 codes. 28 is A. Technician A says non-emission related codes that make the mill illuminate are called type A codes. Technician B says emission related codes that illuminate the mill after the first fault are called type A codes. That's 29. That's B. The vehicle being checked with a scan tool after sitting in the shop overnight. Technician A says the engine coolant and intake air sensors should read the same temperature. He's right. He's the only one that's right. A type blank DTC is set if an emission problem may cause damage to the converter. That's a type A. It's going to be C, the right answer. Type what DTCs are set by non-emission related diagnostic tests? That's C and D. And a freeze frame is stored when a D is set, an A or a B. PCM reprogramming requires use of a special battery charger. That is true. You want one that doesn't make ripples. Number 35, if the operating system PCM needs updating, it's easily done through, you don't do a PCM exchange program, you reflash it. So that one's false. Number 36, technician A says a vehicle may have stored diagnostic trouble codes even if the mill is not illuminated.
True.
Well, that's going to be 36, that's going to be A. Right. Technician A says most TSBs involve a specific stored DTC, and that's going to be, technician B says the ECT and IET should be close to the same temperature after it sits for several hours. And
Both.
that's going to be both of them. Anyway, he's got 4 more questions left, and then we'll be done. Technician A says the power balance test is the best way to isolate a problem cylinder. Well, nowadays you're basically looking at misfire codes, or misfire monitor on the scan tool. Technician B says the compression cylinder leakage test can help determine the cause of the problem. That's going to be both technicians. When should diagnostic trouble codes be cleared?
After the problem has been verified.
Yes, not really. I mean, I was just talking to
Or
Jonathan.
the repair has
If
been
you see a big wad of codes in there, like a big long laundry list of them, it's actually you need to clear them and see which ones come back. All right. Which of the following should be checked before returning the vehicle to the customer?
So which
Radio presets, clean the vehicle, turn off the radio. All these are correct. And don't change the radio station while you're working on it either, okay?
on 39, was that D? Or was that?
Oh, 39 was D.
Okay.
And finally, technician A uses a scan tool to clear stored diagnostic trouble codes. B says clearing the codes will also clear the non-continuous OBD2 monitors. And both of those guys are correct. All right. Is everybody ready to have lunch?